Hello everyone, my name is Toby Horrorboy. Let's make a Faz-Watch. I know I've got a million projects to work on, but I've wanted to make a Faz-Watch since well before Security Breach came out, and we've been in the middle of moving house, so I wanted to do a quick and easy craft project with you guys. I know some people have made Faz-Watch models for a 3D printer, and those are awesome, but they're not super accessible if you don't have a 3D printer. So this tutorial just uses very cheap materials for anyone that just wants to have a Faz-Watch. This is intended for cosplay, not everyday wear, because most of this is made from craft foam and it's not super sturdy. It's not going to disintegrate or anything, but if you bang it around too much, it will get damaged. I'm making this as a cover for my Fitbit Versa 2, so all of the measurements provided are going to be with that model in mind. However, you can just change up the measurements slightly if you have a different smartwatch. The materials we're going to be using are 1mm thick craft foam, Mod Podge or PVA glue, acrylic paint, a little bit of wire for the earring, and fly screen for the speakers. Now that we know what we need, let's get started. The first thing I did here was create the pattern for the front piece. I've got the measurements written there and those are in millimeters. I've also drawn on a few details like the ears and the hat, but we're just going to ignore those for now. I put them there to figure out their scaling in relation to the rest of the watch, but we don't need to worry about that just yet. We want our pattern to be symmetrical, so we're going to find the middle of it and then fold it in half. Now we can cut along that outside edge, ignoring the hat and ears for now, and we've got our first piece. Holding it up to our Fitbit, that does look about right. It looks like it'll fit and it's the right shape. So now we can move on to cutting out the real thing out of craft foam. But first, we have to trace it on. I think it was my Candy Mare animatronic video where I said that I didn't have a craft knife. I finally went out and bought one, and it makes its first appearance in this video. That sort of knife is what's best to use on craft foam, but if you've just got scissors, that's fine too. Try and be really careful to just keep all of the little edges and curves in there. I also cut out the window for the screen here. This was a bit tricky because proportionately, the Fitbit screen is a bit smaller than the Faz-Watch screen, and I didn't want to throw off the proportions of the watch, but I also didn't want to have just the black border of the Fitbit around it. So there was a lot of cutting off a tiny piece and then trying it on the Fitbit to see if it works. But I think it went okay. Next up, we have to cut out our edge pieces, and thankfully we don't need to make a pattern this time. It's just a thin straight line made out of craft foam that we're going to be sticking to our front piece. We have to glue this super carefully so that the edges line up nicely. The type of glue that I'm using here is called contact cement, and you use it by putting the glue onto the two surfaces of what you want to stick together. When it's tacky or mostly touch dry, you stick the two surfaces together and they will never come apart. This is my absolute favorite type of glue. I use it for just about everything. If you've watched my videos before, you will know how I feel about contact cement. So in this instance, we're putting the glue on the very edge of the edge piece, and then putting the glue on the flat part of the back of our watch front. I made a really silly mistake here, so I'm going to show you guys so that you don't do the same thing. My mistake is that I glued the edge piece all of the way up on both sides. The very top and bottom pieces of our Faz-Watch front bit here aren't meant to be flat, and by gluing that edging bit in there, it meant that it didn't fit on the watch band properly. So unfortunately, I did glue that down and I had to actually cut it off. No harm done, but just to save you guys the trouble, don't glue anything to the very top and bottom bits just yet. Unrelated to my mistake, we're now going to score down that area. So I'm just taking the craft knife and just very gently carving a small line. And this is going to help it fit over the very top and bottom edge of our base watch. Be very careful not to cut all of the way through. And this will just be able to help the foam bend in the right direction a little bit easier. Also, we're doing this on the bad side or the inside, not on the outside. So here we are, just fixing up the little problem I caused. And now that it's fixed, we can glue it down to the other edge pieces. Once we've glued together all four corners, we will have the very base of our cover. And thankfully, I got all of the measurements exactly right and the cover fits perfectly. So next up, we're going to be looking at the top and bottom tab pieces. These are attached to the Faz-Watch cover and sit flush along the watch band. And to be honest, I didn't really pattern this exactly. I just drew out two isosceles trapezoids that I knew were going to be a little bit too big, and then just cut them down till they fit. We're going to do more scoring here to help our foam fold around the watch band. They are way too big here, but we're going to cut them down soon. But first, we're going to take our contact cement and glue together our pieces. So we put some contact cement on the inside of the main part of the watch, and then some on the good side of our tab pieces. try and only put the glue where you know that you're not going to be able to see it. I used a skewer to apply the glue for most of this watch just because it was really precise. If you look really closely here, you can see that the tab piece itself has like lines drawn on it. That is a little outline that I drew to show where I can put the glue. Any glue that gets outside of that line is going to be visible when everything's stuck together. And obviously we don't want that. Once our contact cement is touch dry, we can glue the top and bottom tabs to the main body of the watch cover. Once it's all together, we can cut it down to make it the right size and shape, because I made the tabs way too big. So here's a little montage of me fixing that in the background. Anyway, what do you guys think? Do you like videos like this? Would you like to see more cosplay prop tutorials? Is that fun? I don't know, please do let me know. I just like making things from stuff I like, cosplays, animatronics, whatever. But I am interested to hear what you guys think, and I will not be offended if you hate this video. So, now that that's all fixed up, I am just slightly making the screen a tiny little bit bigger. I had a very bad time trying to get this to look smooth and clean, and I'm not super happy with how it turned out, but it's passable, so it's fine. Once we're happy with what we've got so far, we can move on to the next part of the base. The ears. I love that the Faz-Watch has ears and a little hat. I think they are so cute. The shape for these is pretty simple. Though I will say, for the bottom bit where it's going to attach to the rest of the Faz-Watch, I'd recommend using either the current Faz-Watch that you've got so far or the paper pattern from the beginning, and using that as a pattern for the bottom curve of the ear. And that way the ears should sit nice and flush to the rest of the watch. Now, I made a little bit of a mistake here as well. If you look at the picture of the Faz-Watch, you'll see that the edge of the ear is slightly raised. So what I should have done here is, before gluing them on, making that extra little piece and gluing that on first. But I didn't do that, I did that after, so it still got done, but it'll be easier and a little bit cleaner if you do it here. So I am passing this knowledge on to you. So to show you how I did it, I figured out where I wanted my ears to be placed and just did some little marks in pen, and then I used our contact cement to very carefully glue them into place. Once both ears were glued on, I took the same little ear pattern piece and just created the outside ear edge. Like the border of the ear, you guys know what I mean. And then we use contact cement to glue our ear borders onto our ears. And again, please do not do it in this order. Do not be like me, this was a mistake. But it's okay, because now we've got ears. The next step I'm going to do here is the side button. And this is like the first example of me deciding that a detail is just too small and it doesn't really matter how you do it. And there will be more of that later. So what I did here, and you don't have to do it like this, I got some high density craft foam. I believe it's 3mm thick, and I cut out a rectangle for our little button piece. If you look really closely at the picture of the Faz-Watch, you'll see that the button is one piece, but that it has a little groove in the middle. It kind of looks like an up or down volume button, and I tried to recreate that by getting a slightly thicker piece of foam and then carving out a little bit in the middle. But if you can't or don't want to do that, just getting a regular piece of craft foam and cutting out a little rectangle is totally fine. If you did want something a little bit thicker, you could even try using 2 pieces of craft foam and gluing them together and cutting those down. This is very much like a however you want to do it sort of thing, and this is just how I did it, and it was the world's tiniest surgery. So small, I should have gotten tweezers or something to hold it in place. Once we're happy with our tiny button surgery, we can draw out where it's gonna go and glue it down. Hats off to everyone who's made it this far. It is hat time. So we're going to start by cutting out a rectangle of craft foam. The shorter side is going to be the height of our top hat, and the long bit is how wide it's going to be. I would recommend testing out a few different sizes with a bit of paper before you start. So we're going to be gluing the 2 shorter edges of our hat together. I think this is called the side band of the hat, but don't quote me on that. It's like the bit that goes above your head. And then we're going to trace that shape onto some craft foam so we can make the crown, or the very top bit. The last piece we need to cut out for the hat is the brim. Again, I would really recommend using a paper pattern to figure out the exact size that you're going to need. It's like a very slightly elongated semicircle. I used the same high density foam that I used for the little button, just because I had some scraps of that laying around. The brim of the hat isn't super thin, so if you don't have any thicker foam, I'd probably recommend just sticking together 2 pieces of craft foam and using that, but even just 1 layer of craft foam should do the job. The edges of mine were pretty messy, so I sanded them down using a Dremel. If you don't have a Dremel, sandpaper works too. And depending on how you cut that out, you might not even need it. I use my Dremel all of the time and I love it. It's one of my favorite tools. Once we're happy with how all of our pieces look, we can start gluing them together. The first step here is to glue the crown to the side band. I cut out the crown a little bit bigger than the rest of it, so I'm gonna take my thread clippers that I use for foam sometimes and just trim it down a little bit. And then I'm gonna use the Dremel to tidy up that seam. This is very optional. I promise that you don't need to use a Dremel to make a Faz-Watch. But I've got one, so I'm gonna use it at every available opportunity. As it is right now, there's not a lot of surface area between the brim and where the rest of the hat is gonna stick onto it. So what we're gonna do to fix that is to glue together a few small pieces of craft foam and then glue them into the top part of the hat. This will make the hat sturdier because it'll have more structure, and it means that we'll have more foam or surface area for the glue to stick to. So we can just trim off the excess and then glue it onto our brim. One thing to note about this is that the back of the main part of the hat does stick out past the back of the brim. At least it does on mine. It's kind of hard to see what's happening in the in-game model, just if that helps with placement at all. With our hat all in one piece, we can finally glue it onto the rest of our Faz-Watch. And as you can see, it's really starting to look like a Faz-Watch at this point. Now, before we can paint it, we have to prime it. Craft foam is really porous and doesn't take paint very well, so what we're going to do is seal it with some PVA glue. I'm using a product called Mod Podge, but you can also just get PVA glue and water it down just a little bit, and we're going to brush on 2 to 3 coats of our Mod Podge over everywhere that we're going to paint. Make sure that in between coats you're letting it dry properly, and once our Faz-Watch is primed, we can put down our orange paint. Next up, we can paint the whole hat black. And then it's time to start looking at our teeny tiny details. I started by drawing out a really tiny lightning bolt for the left side of our watch, and then just cutting it out of craft foam. This took me a few tries because it's just so small. Putting that aside for a minute, now we're gonna pierce his ear. Glamrock Freddy and the Faz-Watch both have one earlobe pierced, so what we're gonna do is take a sewing pin and just give him a piercing. Make sure to do this on the inner outer part of the ear, where there's only one layer of craft foam. You have to be able to stick a little piece of wire through it, so just keep going until it's big enough. I love cosplaying and prop making. You're gonna want a piece of wire that you can bend really easily. I'm pretty sure that this is a scrap of armature wire. And just while we're here, we're gonna bend our wire to see how it looks. When you're removing the wire, try and keep it as in that shape as possible, so that you don't have to worry as much about the paint cracking when you put it back in. And now, everything that needs to be painted teal can be. I'd recommend not cutting the wire down just yet, just so that it's easier to paint. So we need to paint our earring wire, our lightning bolt, the side button, and the hat band. Once all of our teal paint is dry, it's time to do the red border on the lightning bolt. So the red paint goes on all sides of the lightning bolt on the edges, and if you can, just bring it around to the front very slightly, like just the tiniest amount, like probably less than a millimeter. And once the paint is dry, we can glue it onto our Faz-Watch. The lightning bolt is a little bit of a tricky shape to get the glue down for, so I marked down where each point was going to go on the watch with a pin. And now we can put the piercing back in. Just create a little loop and then cut off all the excess. And the earring moves a little bit, which I think is adorable. Next up, we're going to do the red and black buttons at the bottom of the Faz-Watch. So the one on the left is a circle and the one on the right is like a really softly rounded triangle. We're just going to cut both of those out of craft foam. And then we do a few coats of Mod Podge to seal the foam. So, about painting it, the circle is just red, but the triangle is red and black. So to start off, we're going to put down a few coats of red on both of them. Now we have to paint a small black rounded triangle inside of our red triangle. I was really dreading doing this part because the painter's tape never really works for me. So I fully went out and bought a tiny paintbrush and some tiny masking tape. And this stuff is so good. The brand is Tamiya, and honestly it worked so well that I'm gonna go back and get more sizes. And look at my new tiny paintbrush. Okay, sorry, but make sure you leave a fair bit of red at the front around the edges. Look at how clean that is. Once that's 100% dry, we're going to put down another piece of tape and do the black border. Much like the lightning bolt, this bit is on the edge and it comes around to the front a little bit. I'm going to show the peeling of the tape each time because I love it. Enjoy, I guess. And then we do the same with the second side, and its tape, and the third, which I apparently did not film. But now it's time to glue those on. Remember, circle on the left, triangle on the right, and tiny little pin marks just inside of where we're gonna put it so it ends up in the right spot. So this next bit is our second last step, and it's a little weird, but stick with me. Also, I filmed this bit as a test before the last bit, so just ignore that the buttons are gone. I promise they'll be back in the next shot. So there are 6 little black bits on the Faz-Watch, 4 on the right hand side and 2 at the bottom in the center, and I have chosen to interpret them all as speakers. And they might not be speakers, but until Steel Wool Studios tells me personally that I'm wrong, their speakers. So there are lots of different ways that you can do this. The ones on the right certainly look like they're inset, like lower than the rest of the watch. And I definitely could have done something with that, but I did not plan that far ahead. My bad. So you could do the craft foam thing again, or you could paint them straight on, or you can do what I'm about to do. I had some spare fly screen laying around, so I'm gonna cut that into the shapes because fly screen looks like speaker screen. If you don't have any fly screen, you could also use like a tulle or like a netting that you'd like make a tutu out of. My dad did this one time when he made me a Star Trek prop many years ago, so I'm stealing this from him. So what I'm gonna do is cut out the two big shapes and then glue them into place with contact cement. This is kind of messy because the fly screen is obviously full of holes, but it does work. Before the glue was 100% dry, I tried to pick some of the glue out from in between the grates. The point of using the fly screen was to give it some texture, and if there's too much glue in there, it won't be as visible. It looks a bit weird right now, but just trust the process. Once we're done with our two main pieces, we can move on to our tiny side speakers. So there are 4 identical pieces to cut out. Mine ended up being 2x4 little fly screen holes each. Remember, you can't really see the other side of the Faz-Watch in the game, so it's possible that they're longer than that and that they wrap around the side. I didn't do that, but obviously you're more than welcome to. Also, the edges are very slightly rounded, so try and avoid just cutting out a straight rectangle. Once we've cut out all 4 of those, we can start gluing them on. It was a little bit tricky to position them correctly because they're so small and evenly spaced. I made sure that there would be enough room by placing them on the Faz-Watch before I put any glue down. I glued the top one down first and then worked my way down, going one at a time. The final step for the speakers is to paint them. They probably look okay as they are now, but you can see just like an unreasonable amount of glue through there. And I wanted them to look like a really solid black, so I'm just taking my tiny paintbrush and putting on some black paint. And as you can hopefully see, now it's the right color and it has a bit of a fun texture. And just to reiterate, this whole fly screen situation is just me being kind of obnoxious. You can use craft foam or just paint it straight on, whatever works. It is just a Faz-Watch, please do whatever works best for you. Now that the speakers are painted, we are up to the final stage, sealing it all in. We're just going to apply 1 or 2 more coats of Mod Podge or PVA glue, make sure you water it down a little bit, and that'll just help seal it all in. And once that's dry, our Faz-Watch is done. I'm going to show a quick shot of what it looks like again at the end of the video, but I just want to know, was this video good? Was it helpful? Did you learn something? Was it extremely difficult to follow? Was it at least mildly to moderately entertaining? Would you like to see more videos like this? I didn't really have any big plans to cosplay Gregory, but I probably will now because I've got the Faz-Watch. And I would love to make some more FNAF props. So if you'd like me to record more tutorials for those, please do let me know. And if anyone actually uses this tutorial to make their own Faz-Watch and posts it anywhere, please do tag me, I would love to see. If you have any questions, please leave a comment and I'll get back to that as soon as I can. This little video was a bit different to what I usually post on here, but I do love cosplaying, so let me know what you guys want to see more of and I'll try and post more of that. It can be all of the above, you don't have to pick one thing. Okay, so there we go. I'm gonna go get my desk set up to skin that Huggy Wuggy animatronic, so I'll see you guys next time for that video. I also post stuff on TikTok and Instagram under the same username, if you want to keep up with me there as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon, superstars.